Section 12 of Orlando by Virginia Woolf. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by Corrie Samuel. Chapter 4, Part 4. It was happy for Orlando, though at first disappointing, that this should be so, for she now began to live much in the company of men of genius. Nor were they so different from the rest of us as one might have supposed. Addison, Pope, Swift, proved, she found, to be fond of tea. They liked arbours. They collected little bits of coloured glass. They adored grottos. Rank was not distasteful to them. Praise was delightful. They wore plum-coloured suits one day and grey another. Mr. Swift had a fine Malacca cane. Mr. Addison scented his handkerchiefs. Mr. Pope suffered with his head. A piece of gossip did not come amiss. Nor were they without their jealousies. We are jotting down a few reflections that came to Orlando higgledy-piggledy. At first she was annoyed with herself for noticing such trifles, and kept a book in which to write down their memorable sayings, but the page remained empty. All the same, her spirits revived, and she took to tearing up her cards of invitation to great parties, kept her evenings free, began to look forward to Mr. Pope's visit, to Mr. Addison's, to Mr. Swift's, and so on and so on. If the reader will here refer to The Rape of the Lock, to The Spectator, to Gulliver's Travels, he will understand precisely what these mysterious words may mean. Indeed, biographers and critics might save themselves all their labours, if readers would only take this advice. For when we read, "Whether the nymph shall break Diana's law, or some frail china jar receive a flaw, or stain her honour or her new brocade, forget her prayers or miss a masquerade, or lose her heart or necklace at a ball," we know, as if we heard him, how Mr. Pope's tongue flickered like a lizard's, how his eyes flashed, how his hand trembled, how he loved, how he lied, how he suffered. In short, every secret of a writer's soul, every experience of his life, every quality of his mind, is written large in his works. Yet we require critics to explain the one and biographers to expound the other. That time hangs heavy on people's hands is the only explanation of the monstrous growth. So, now that we have read a page or two of The Rape of the Lock, we know exactly why Orlando was so much amused and so much frightened, and so very bright-cheeked and bright-eyed that afternoon. Mrs. Nelly then knocked at the door to say that Mr. Addison waited on her ladyship. At this Mr. Pope got up with a wry smile, made his congee, and limped off. In came Mr. Addison. Let us, as he takes his seat, read the following passage from The Spectator. "I consider woman as a beautiful, romantic animal that may be adorned with furs and feathers, pearls and diamonds, ores and silks. The lynx shall cast its skin at her feet to make her a tippet. The peacock, parrot, and swan shall pay contributions to her muff. The sea shall be searched for shells, and the rocks for gems, and every part of nature furnish out its share towards the embellishment of a creature that is the most consummate work of it. All this I shall indulge them in, but as for the petticoat I have been speaking of, I neither can nor will allow it." We hold that gentleman, cocked hat and all, in the hollow of our hands. Look once more into the crystal. Is he not clear to the very wrinkle in his stocking? Does not every ripple and curve of his wit lie exposed before us, and his benignity, and his timidity, and his urbanity, and the fact that he would marry a countess and die very respectably in the end? All is clear. And when Mr. Addison has said his say, there is a terrific rap at the door, and Mr. Swift, who had these arbitrary ways with him, walks in unannounced. One moment, where is Gulliver's Travels? Here it is. Let us read a passage from the Voyage to the Houyhnhnms. "I enjoyed perfect health of body and tranquillity of mind. I did not find the treachery or inconstancy of a friend, nor the injuries of a secret or open enemy. I had no occasion of bribing, flattering, or pimping, to procure the favour of any great man or of his minion. I wanted no fence against fraud or oppression. Here was neither physician to destroy my body, nor lawyer to ruin my fortune, no informer to watch my words and actions, or forge accusations against me for hire. Here were no gibers, censurers, backbiters, pickpockets, highwaymen, housebreakers, attorneys, bawds, buffoons, gamesters, politicians, wits, splenetic, tedious talkers. But stop your iron pelt of words, lest you flay us all alive, and yourself too. Nothing could be plainer than that violent man. He is so coarse, and yet so clean, so brutal, yet so kind, scorns the whole world, yet talks baby language to a girl, and will die, can we doubt it, in a madhouse? So Orlando poured out tea for them all, and sometimes, when the weather was fine, she carried them down to the country with her, and feasted them royally in the round parlour, which she had hung with their pictures all in a circle, so that Mr. Pope could not say that Mr. Addison came before him, or the other way about. They were very witty, too, but their wit is all in their books, and taught her the most important part of style, which is the natural run of the voice in speaking, a quality which none that has not heard it can imitate, not Green even, with all his skill, for it is born of the air, and breaks like a wave on the furniture, and rolls and fades away, and is never to be recaptured, least of all by those who prick up their ears half a century later and try. They taught her this merely by the cadence of their voices in speech, so that her style changed somewhat, and she wrote some very pleasant, witty verses and characters in prose. And so she lavished her wine on them, and put bank-notes, which they took very kindly, beneath their plates at dinner, and accepted their dedications, and thought herself highly honoured by the exchange. Thus time ran on, and Orlando could often be heard saying to herself, with an emphasis which might, perhaps, make the hearer a little suspicious, "Upon my soul, what a life this is!" For she was still in search of that commodity. But circumstances soon forced her to consider the matter more narrowly. One day she was pouring out tea for Mr. Pope, while, as anyone can tell from the verses quoted above, he sat, very bright-eyed, observant, and all crumpled up in a chair by her side. "Lord," she thought, as she raised the sugar-tongs, "how women in ages to come will envy me! And yet—" She paused, for Mr. Pope needed her attention. "And yet, let us finish her thought for her. When anybody says, 'How future ages will envy me,' it is safe to say that they are extremely uneasy at the present moment. Was this life quite so exciting, quite so flattering, quite so glorious as it sounds when the memoir writer has done his work upon it? For one thing, Orlando had a positive hatred of tea. For another, the intellect, divine as it is, and all worshipful, has a habit of lodging in the most seedy of carcasses, and often, alas, acts the cannibal among the other faculties, so that often, where the mind is biggest, the heart, the senses, magnanimity, charity, tolerance, kindliness, and the rest of them scarcely have room to breathe. Then the high opinion poets have of themselves, then the low one they have of others, then the enmities, injuries, envies, and repartees in which they are constantly engaged, then the volubility with which they impart them, then the rapacity with which they demand sympathy for them. All this, one may whisper, lest the wits may overhear us, makes pouring out tea a more precarious, and indeed more arduous occupation than is generally allowed. Added to which, we whisper again lest the women may overhear us, there is a little secret which men share among them. Lord Chesterfield whispered it to his son with strict injunctions to secrecy. Women are but children of a larger growth. A man of sense only trifles with them, plays with them, humours and flatters them. which, since children always hear what they are not meant to, and sometimes even grow up, may have somehow leaked out, so that the whole ceremony of pouring out tea is a curious one. A woman knows very well that, though a wit sends her his poems, praises her judgment, solicits her criticism, and drinks her tea, this by no means signifies that he respects her opinions, admires her understanding, or will refuse, though the rapier is denied him, to run her through the body with his pen. All this we say, whisper it as low as we can, may have leaked out by now, so that even with the cream jug suspended and the sugar tongs distended, the ladies may fidget a little, look out of the window a little, yawn a little, and so let the sugar fall with a great plop, as Orlando did now, into Mr. Pope's tea. Never was any mortal so ready to suspect an insult, or so quick to avenge one, as Mr. Pope. He turned to Orlando and presented her instantly with the rough draft of a certain famous line in the Characters of Women. Much polish was afterwards bestowed on it, but even in the original it was striking enough. Orlando received it with a curtsy. Mr. Pope left her with a bow. Orlando, to cool her cheeks, for really she felt as if the little man had struck her, strolled in the nut grove at the bottom of the garden. Soon the cool breezes did their work. To her amazement, she found that she was hugely relieved to find herself alone. She watched the merry boatloads rowing up the river. No doubt the sight put her in mind of one or two incidents in her past life. She sat herself down in profound meditation beneath a fine willow tree. There she sat till the stars were in the sky. Then she rose, turned, and went into the house, where she sought her bedroom and locked the door. Now she opened a cupboard in which hung still many of the clothes she had worn as a young man of fashion, and from among them she chose a black velvet suit, richly trimmed with Venetian lace. It was a little out of fashion, indeed, but it fitted her to perfection, and dressed in it she looked the very figure of a noble lord. She took a turn or two before the mirror to make sure that her petticoats had not lost her the freedom of her legs, and then let herself secretly out of doors. It was a fine night early in April. A myriad stars mingling with the light of a sickle moon, which again was enforced by the street lamps, made a light infinitely becoming to the human countenance and to the architecture of Mr. Wren. Everything appeared in its tenderest form, yet, just as it seemed on the point of dissolution, some drop of silver sharpened it to animation. Thus it was that talk should be, thought Orlando, indulging in foolish reverie, that society should be, that friendship should be, that love should be. For, heaven knows why, just as we have lost faith in human intercourse, some random collocation of barns and trees, or a haystack and a waggon, presents us with so perfect a symbol of what is unattainable that we begin the search again. She entered Leicester Square as she made these observations. The buildings had an airy yet formal symmetry not theirs by day. The canopy of the sky seemed most dexterously washed in to fill up the outline of roof and chimney. A young woman, who sat dejectedly with one arm drooping by her side, the other reposing in her lap, on a seat beneath a plane tree in the middle of the square, seemed the very figure of grace, simplicity, and desolation. Orlando swept her hat off to her in the manner of a gallant paying his addresses to a lady of fashion in a public place. The young woman raised her head. It was of the most exquisite shapeliness. The young woman raised her eyes. Orlando saw them to be of a lustre such as is sometimes seen on teapots, but rarely in a human face. Through the silver glaze the young woman looked up at him, for a man he was to her, appealing, hoping, trembling, fearing. She rose. She accepted his arm. For, need we stress the point, she was of the tribe which nightly burnishes their wares, and sets them in order on the common counter to wait the highest bidder. She led Orlando to the room in Gerrard Street which was her lodging. To feel her hanging lightly, yet like a suppliant, on her arm, roused in Orlando all the feelings which become a man. She looked, she felt, she talked like one. Yet, having been so lately a woman herself, she suspected that the girl's timidity and her hesitating answers, and the very fumbling with the key in the latch, and the fold of her cloak, and the droop of her wrist, were all put on to gratify her masculinity. Upstairs they went, and the pains which the poor creature had been at to decorate her room and hide the fact that she had no other, deceived Orlando not a moment. The deception roused her scorn, the truth roused her pity. One thing showing through the other bred the oddest assortment of feeling, so that she did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Meanwhile Nell, as the girl called herself, unbuttoned her gloves, carefully concealed the left-hand thumb, which wanted mending, then drew behind a screen, where, perhaps, she rouged her cheeks, arranged her clothes, fixed a new kerchief round her neck, all the time prattling, as women do, to amuse her lover, though Orlando could have sworn, from the tone of her voice, that her thoughts were elsewhere. When all was ready, out she came, prepared, but here Orlando could stand it no longer. In the strangest torment of anger, merriment, and pity, she flung off all disguise and admitted herself a woman. At this, Nell burst into such a roar of laughter as might have been heard across the way. "Well, my dear," she said, when she had somewhat recovered, "I'm by no means sorry to hear it, for the plain Dunstable of the matter is—" And it was remarkable how soon, on discovering that they were of the same sex, her manner changed, and she dropped her plaintive, appealing ways. "The plain Dunstable of the matter is that I'm not in the mood for the society of the other sex to-night. Indeed, I'm in the devil of a fix." Whereupon, drawing up the fire and stirring a bowl of punch, she told Orlando the whole story of her life. Since it is Orlando's life that engages us at present, we need not relate the adventures of the other lady, but it is certain that Orlando had never known the hours speed faster or more merrily, though Mistress Nell had not a particle of wit about her, and when the name of Mr. Pope came up in talk, asked innocently if he were connected with the peruke-maker of that name in Jermyn Street. Yet, to Orlando, such is the charm of ease and the seduction of beauty, this poor girl's talk, larded though it was with the commonest expressions of the street corners, tasted like wine after the fine phrases she had been used to, and she was forced to the conclusion that there was something in the sneer of Mr. Pope, in the condescension of Mr. Addison, and in the secret of Lord Chesterfield, which took away her relish for the society of wits, deeply though she must continue to respect their works. These poor creatures, she ascertained, for Nell bought Prue, and Prue Kitty, and Kitty Rose, had a society of their own, of which they now elected her a member. Each would tell the story of the adventures which had landed her in her present way of life. Several were the natural daughters of earls, and one was a good deal nearer than she should have been to the king's person. None was too wretched or too poor but to have some ring or handkerchief in her pocket which stood her in lieu of pedigree. So they would draw round the punch-bowl, which Orlando made it her business to furnish generously, and many were the fine tales they told, and many the amusing observations they made, for it cannot be denied that when women get together—but hist, they are always careful to see that the doors are shut, and that not a word of it gets into print. All they desire is—but hist again, is that not a man's step on the stair? All they desire, we were about to say, when the gentleman took the very words out of our mouths. Women have no desires, says this gentleman, coming into Nell's parlour, only affectations. Without desires, she has served him and he is gone. Their conversation cannot be of the slightest interest to any one. It is well known, says Mr. S.W., that when they lack the stimulus of the other sex, women can find nothing to say to each other. When they are alone, they do not talk, they scratch. And since they cannot talk together, and scratching cannot continue without interruption, and it is well known, Mr. T.R. has proved it, that women are incapable of any feeling of affection for their own sex and hold each other in the greatest aversion, What can we suppose that women do when they seek out each other's society? As that is not a question that can engage the attention of a sensible man, let us, who enjoy the immunity of all biographers and historians from any sex whatever, pass it over, and merely state that Orlando professed great enjoyment in the society of her own sex, and leave it to the gentlemen to prove, as they are very fond of doing, that this is impossible. But to give an exact and particular account of Orlando's life at this time becomes more and more out of the question. As we peer and grope in the ill-lit, ill-paved, ill-ventilated courtyards that lay about Gerrard Street and Drury Lane at that time, we seem to catch sight of her, and then again to lose it. The task is made still more difficult by the fact that she found it convenient at this time to change frequently from one set of clothes to another. Thus she often occurs in contemporary memoirs as Lord So-and-so, who was in fact her cousin. Her bounty is ascribed to him, and it is he who is said to have written the poems that were really hers. She had, it seems, no difficulty in sustaining the different parts, for her sex changed far more frequently than those who have worn only one set of clothing can conceive, nor can there be any doubt that she reaped a twofold harvest by this device. The pleasures of life were increased, and its experiences multiplied. For the probity of breeches she exchanged the seductiveness of petticoats, and enjoyed the love of both sexes equally. So then one may sketch her spending her morning in a china robe of ambiguous gender among her books, then receiving a client or two, for she had many scores of suppliants, in the same garment. Then she would take a turn in the garden and clip the nut trees, for which knee breeches were convenient. Then she would change into a flowered taffeta, which best suited a drive to Richmond and a proposal of marriage from some great nobleman, and so back to town, where she would don a snuff-coloured gown like a lawyer's, and visit the courts to hear how her cases were doing, for her fortune was wasting hourly, and the suits seemed no nearer consummation than they had been 100 years ago. And so, finally, when night came, she would more often than not become a nobleman complete from head to toe, and walk the streets in search of adventure. Returning from some of these junketings, of which there were many stories told at the time, as that she fought a duel, served on one of the king's ships as a captain, was seen to dance naked on a balcony, and fled with a certain lady to the Low Countries, where the lady's husband followed them. But of the truth or otherwise of these stories we express no opinion. Returning from whatever her occupation may have been, she made a point sometimes of passing beneath the windows of a coffee-house, where she could see the wits without being seen, and could thus fancy from their gestures what wise, witty, or spiteful things they were saying without hearing a word of them, which was perhaps an advantage. And once she stood half an hour watching 3 shadows on the blind, drinking tea together in a house in Bolt Court. Never was any play so absorbing. She wanted to cry out, "Bravo! Bravo!" For, to be sure, what a fine drama it was! What a page torn from the thickest volume of human life! There was the little shadow with the pouting lips, fidgeting this way and that on his chair, uneasy, petulant, officious. There was the bent female shadow, crooking a finger in the cup to feel how deep the tea was, for she was blind. And there was the Roman-looking, rolling shadow in the big armchair, he who twisted his fingers so oddly, and jerked his head from side to side, and swallowed down the tea in such vast gulps. Dr. Johnson, Mr. Boswell, and Mrs. Williams, those were the shadow's names. So absorbed was she in the sight that she forgot to think how other ages would have envied her, though it seems probable that on this occasion they would. She was content to gaze and gaze. At length Mr. Boswell rose. He saluted the old woman with tart asperity. But with what humility did he not abase himself before the great Roman shadow, who now rose to its full height, and rocking somewhat as he stood there, rolled out the most magnificent phrases that ever left human lips. So Orlando thought them, though she never heard a word that any of the 3 shadows said as they sat there drinking tea. At length she came home one night after one of these saunterings and mounted to her bedroom. She took off her laced coat and stood there in shirt and breeches looking out of the window. There was something stirring in the air which forbade her to go to bed. A white haze lay over the town, for it was a frosty night in midwinter, and a magnificent vista lay all round her. She could see St. Paul's, the Tower, Westminster Abbey, with all the spires and domes of the city churches, the smooth bulk of its banks, the opulent and ample curves of its halls and meeting-places. On the north rose the smooth, shorn heights of Hampstead, and in the west the streets and squares of Mayfair shone out in one clear radiance. Upon this serene and orderly prospect the stars looked down, glittering, positive, hard, from a cloudless sky. In the extreme clearness of the atmosphere, the line of every roof, the cowl of every chimney was perceptible. Even the cobbles in the streets showed distinct one from another, and Orlando could not help comparing this orderly scene with the irregular and huddled purlieus which had been the city of London in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Then, she remembered, the city, if such one could call it, lay crowded, a mere huddle and conglomeration of houses, under her windows at Blackfriars. The stars reflected themselves in deep pits of stagnant water which lay in the middle of the streets. A black shadow at the corner where the wine-shop used to stand was, as likely as not, the corpse of a murdered man. She could remember the cries of many a one wounded in such night brawlings when she was a little boy, held to the diamond-paned window in her nurse's arms. Troops of ruffians, men and women, unspeakably interlaced, lurched down the streets, trolling out wild songs with jewels flashing in their ears and knives gleaming in their fists. On such a night as this the impermeable tangle of the forests on Highgate and Hampstead would be outlined, writhing in contorted intricacy against the sky. Here and there, on one of the hills which rose above London, was a stark gallows tree, with a corpse nailed to rot or parch on its cross. For danger and insecurity, lust and violence, poetry and filth, swarmed over the tortuous Elizabethan highways, and buzzed and stank. Orlando could remember even now the smell of them on a hot night, in the little rooms and narrow pathways of the city. Now, she leant out of her window, all was light, order, and serenity. There was the faint rattle of a coach on the cobbles. She heard the faraway cry of the night watchman, "Just 12 o'clock on a frosty morning." No sooner had the words left his lips than the first stroke of midnight sounded. Orlando then for the first time noticed a small cloud gathered behind the dome of St. Paul's. As the strokes sounded, the cloud increased, and she saw it darken and spread with extraordinary speed. At the same time a light breeze rose, and by the time the 6th stroke of midnight had struck, the whole of the eastern sky was covered with an irregular moving darkness, though the sky to the west and the north stayed as clear as ever. Then the cloud spread north. Height upon height above, the city was engulfed by it. Only Mayfair, with all its lights shining, burnt more brilliantly than ever by contrast. With the 8th stroke, some hurrying tatters of cloud sprawled over Piccadilly. They seemed to mass themselves, and to advance with extraordinary rapidity towards the West End. As the 9th, 10th, and 11th strokes struck, a huge blackness sprawled over the whole of London. With the 12th stroke of midnight, the darkness was complete. A turbulent welter of cloud covered the city. All was darkness, all was doubt, all was confusion. The 18th century was over. The 19th century had begun. End of section 12.